Record. All right.
Hi.
Hello. So welcome. So you
Thank you.
had emailed me, just so people have context. You emailed me because I think you fought through Seekers of Unity.
Yes, Zevi. Yeah.
You found some of my conversations, and you said, "Hey, like I want to talk with you. Let's talk about
Yes.
let's talk about oneness and identity and different things." And I'm like, heck yeah."
Yeah, and I feel like I generally find having these conversations to be like a part of my identity in that regard. It's just these are things that I do, even if I'm not doing them officially.
Yeah.
I enjoy them. So like any opportunity I get, I'm like, I want to do this. And so I just emailed, I was like, if you might be interested in a conversation, I would really appreciate just talking about my thoughts on these topics, especially the things that I've been working on lately, because those are projects that I'm also like sort of engaged in at a more deeper level. So just talking about those, and I feel like our conversation will be quite fruitful for the both of us and the viewers that are watching.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. You're currently in Toronto, going to Toronto University, right? You're a student there.
Yes, at the University of Toronto, and I'm a Pearson Scholar there, and currently I'm studying psychology and philosophy, doing research in the both and majoring in both of them. So,
and where are you from originally?
India originally. So I'm an international student in that regard. My mom just dropped me here, and I'm in Toronto, like just right now, just settling in. So.
Oh, okay. Got you. Because I checked out some of the links that you sent me, and you had done, let's see, you had done a TED talk on mindfulness meditation, I think. And then there was the one that you did on Seekers of Unity, which was, it looked like it sounded like it's a deep dive into Hinduism and the metaphysics behind all of that.
Yes. And I feel like those are like a part of the conversations I'm having at deeper length. Like currently I am engaged in a project on identity and self-transcendence and how that relates to aesthetic experiences, because I believe myself to be like a very artistic and creative person. And so as for my own development, I've used art as a great tool to like sort of understand who I am at length, and also to some degree feel a deep connection to the divine or whatever else. And so I've been trying to research those themes currently for my research project, and Hinduism in that regard as my identity connects to those topics, because I feel like our culture has like overall a stronger emphasis on identifying, especially the divine, in these like crazy images. We have like all of these different forms of what God is. And so it's quite complex in that regard. So like, I feel like my talk with Seekers of Unity was to sort of bring in my cultural like identity and its perspective and how it relates to the work I'm doing at large. And also for like the mindfulness thing, because I feel like Buddhism talks about mindfulness a lot, right? And it's quite common that you sort of start associating mindfulness with Buddhism, but I in particular feel that there is something that's always missing in that dialogue, which is this sense of intuitive, transcendent connection to the divine, which us Hindus have emphasized since the beginning. It's that even to discover your soul or spirit, you have to sort of like tap into your sixth sense or intuition in that regard, to even start that process of self-discovery, this sense of kundali awakening or whatever you want to call it. So with mindfulness, like in my talk that I was talking about integrating imagination into it, because I always feel like, as somebody who's always been like this ADHD type, like hyperactive person, people just tell me, sit still, be mindful, focus. And I just like, to me, that feels like, how does that work? I am just like all
hey,
over
you
the
try
place.
being me doing that.
I know. And be mindful. I'm like, that always sounded weird to me in the discourse, because like, I am never mindful when I do my best work. It's just like, it happens unconsciously rather than consciously. So when I talk about mindful imagination, I have like sort of through a lot of like discipline able to understand why mindfulness is important. But then I'm like, I'm not going to do your kind of mindfulness. I'm going to do my kind of mindfulness. So that's what I was like sort of
interesting you're saying that. I think you're right. I mean, at least as a Western California, and like pretty much mindfulness. If you ask me what religion's associated with, the first thing that comes in is Buddhism,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
And so it's funny, I've never really quite thought about that. I'm like, well, what about don't the Hindus have a mindfulness? And I think I probably just associated it is the same thing or something. But you're saying no, there's quite a difference.
Yep. Exactly.
And that difference, I think what I heard you say has to do with, we use the word divine, like a connection with, you use the word divine and intuition, right? And a
Mhm.
connection with something
Bigger than yourself.
bigger than you, right? Whereas,
Mhm.
yeah, like I guess in Buddhism, well, it seems like I would imagine Tibetan Buddhism, which has a lot of like Hindu influence, right?
Mhm.
In a lot of ways, they have more of a sense of, I think, what you would call the divine. But most
Yeah.
Buddhism's
Good.
sacred, maybe, but divine,
Yeah.
not exactly, right?
Yes, because they don't believe in a God or even a soul. And so that was something that I was discussing with Seekers of Unity, is that the no self view, like it just gives me like, I don't know, chills or something, like a fever. I cannot imagine a philosophical theory that bases itself on believing that there is no soul and there's no God, because I am in particular like hardly theistic in that regard, which is a recent turn. Like I did not feel that way previously. So I would consider Buddhism in that regard to be atheistic, and even its mindfulness in that way feels a little bit empty. Like it's like you're focusing, you're seeing what's in front of you, but you're not able to see that there's
Yeah,
something sacred, but like also divine, like this element of godliness,
yeah,
even in the person that's sitting right in front of me. Like I can like see the divine in you, and that would be like a more Hindu style of seeing. Even in our songs, you're like,
yeah,
uh, it goes like "Tujh mein Rab dikhta hai," which says that like I see God in you, and there's a lot of songs that talk that way. It's like our way of like conversing
yeah,
normally. So yeah.
right. I have to
Mhm.
say, it's funny when I think about, there is something about when I've spent times and made friends with people who come from India, and when I just get a sense of that culture, there is, like, if I imagine being Indian,
Mhm.
and then just my pre-reflective thing, whatever it is that I feel back into that gives me a sense of who I am, I have a feeling that there's something really, really different than than
What I'm talking about.
than what I'm like, what I feel back into, right?
Oh.
Which is there's something, there's a way that India merges, it's all of the polytheism, it's all of this multiplicity, and like, and the colors and the fullness. Even when you think about India, I think about like just tons of people, and right.
Yeah.
And there's something about that seems unique to me about India.
Hmm.
And
I'm
I'm
interested in
imagining it
like,
has something to do, I'm wondering if it has something to do with exactly what you're talking about.
how would you say your identity sort of like structures itself? Because like I would say America is very individualistic in that way. Also to some degree, Republican and like very, I don't know. I
Yeah.
guess like the identity, the way people are seeing themselves can be politically oriented. There's other things that people associate with, but there's less of this sense of like a constant obsession with God, which I think Indians have. They're
Yeah.
very obsessed with God. So
Yeah.
like where do you derive this sense of like
It's a
who I
great,
am in your culture? Like I'm just
yeah.
very interested in that.
Well, I think first of all, I would say that where I derive it is not something explicit, right? So it's like it's the thing that's most concealed to me, right? But I'd have to say that it it yeah, it's something about some ground of individuality, right? It it's there is a sense of where, when I've gone to Europe and I've traveled in Europe, there's a sense where you get such a sense of history there that we don't have in the United States, right? like if you're at a town that's like before the 1700s, that's really old. So I have a feeling it doesn't have a sense of history in it, right? That other countries have. And there's a certain kind of emptiness, I think, that comes with that, right? That that in some sense we are kind of the whole American thing is really, a bunch of rebels, right? That broke free.
Who do you feel about it?
Yeah.
And also, like, my grandma once said to me that religion is return to the origin, and to me that like often relates to even culture or other forms of like how you sort of always want to fall back onto something historical in that regard. And I feel like with even America being more atheistic than other cultures, and also like in the regard that you're telling me, a lack of that historical emphasis, how do you see like your own like self relating to, I guess, religious discourse? And I do understand the philosophical side, but like religion might just be too far off, or like how does that work?
Well, a couple of things. It's strange because apparently I hear America's really religious, but it's like, but there's something about that like whatever. I don't get the sense that we're deeply religious in that sense. Like I think that we're mostly Protestant. Like Protestant has been pretty much the main religion, and a lot of like if you go to a Protestant church, most of the ritual is really stripped out of it. That's kind of one of the things that defines it. It becomes very textual, I guess, and very much about like propositional belief in some level. Like there's this kind of quality of, being saved and like what you believe. And it's this very individual encounter with God. But I could tell you that there's a big longing in me. And I think it has something to do with precisely because there's something about the human nature that there's a deprecation of the sense of the saturation with of a theology of some kind that you dwell in, that you see everywhere, the ornamentation and the colors, and I admire all of like I love the Tibetans, right? And all of it's so other to me in that respect. But it
like,
does.
You don't even have to be religious to like admire that like aesthetic of religion. Like it's like the temples and like the big stuff. It looks somehow sacred, just even if you're not a believer in God.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even think I sometimes think about, like, I fantasize sometimes about when I read medieval towns, like old medieval towns. At least my image of them is like the highest point was the cross, and then everything was explicitly built in relationship to that, and every part of it there was a hierarchy of meaning that was imbued in what you dwelled in. So you lived in this cosmology, if you will. And there's something about that just seems so foreign to me, but so I feel so nostalgic for it in a weird way. I've never had it, but I feel so nostalgic for it. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So do you feel like in terms of, because as I'm discussing identity and maybe transcendence, how do you feel like your longing for something like that relates to your own sense of like feeling fulfilled or like complete in your identity? Because like I always like whenever Buddhists talk about emptiness, it like scares the shit out of me. I'm like, that emptiness notion, because I feel like a sense of whole that's necessary for identity, a sense of cohesion, a sense of fulfillment and completion, maybe like self-actualization, so to say. And then they talk about emptiness, and maybe emptiness is not akin to nothingness, but it just still feels very, I don't know, not positive to me. And like the way you describe your longing, how would you say that relates to like your sense of feeling whole in yourself or like connecting to something?
Well, I would say the there's the missing part of the longing, right? Which think is, I think it's that I think it's that implicit nihilism of our age that I think in America is probably is it's most acute in America.
Yeah.
And I notice it comes up for me, and I'm super sensitive to this, but like when I go to like a shopping mall or like a newer town with a bunch of like track homes, right?
I
These
don't know about
Oh, you don't know about track homes? It's like they're
yeah.
basically, if you go to, for example, if you go to, my son lives in Plano, Texas, which is like a suburb of Dallas. If you go there, you pass these huge, right? These huge fields and rows of houses that have like maybe 5 different models, and they just go for miles, right?
Wow.
And even in America, we do this kind of thing where like, for example, in those track homes, they're built to look like houses. Like literally, you can feel them built to look like a house, but
Within a house.
they're not really a house. It's in the it's there's something so nauseatingly empty about it, right? Hollow, I would say. And for example, you also see these towns in America where they'll build a town center to literally look like an old town center, right? It's whatever that is really on high in America. And I think that a lot of that rootlessness, right, and the lack of the fullness, I think comes out in our architecture, right, in all these choices that we make. In fact, in Atlanta, I actually went. They have this. My mom lived there for a long time, and I was visiting one time, and they took some kind of temple from India, piece by piece, and they brought it over to Atlanta, and this thing was just, every single part of it was this animating story with gods popping out and like in these fractal, and you're walking through this thing, and like I didn't know what the stories were, but like the whole thing was so thriving with meaning, right?
Exactly. You feel a sense of home, I guess,
Yeah.
when you look at those things. And I feel like there is a word for this. I read it somewhere. Maybe Vervaeke mentioned it, domicide, I think.
Yeah.
And like that's the sense of destruction of home. And like personally at India, like I felt it since the beginning, because like I felt like I didn't belong. It was majorly the culture was too suffocating for me. I feel individualistic in that way. I felt liberated when I came to the US, like to Canada.
Yeah.
But it's like the past makes so much sense for the richness of it, but today, like even in India, like it's like, who are we now? People have changed. There's so much poverty, and then like even like this festival of Holi, when you talk about colors, it's not the same. They don't celebrate it the same way. People are throwing eggs at each other, and then like everybody's nosy. So like the culture, like and whenever I see American people talk about India, they're like, so wonderful. And I'm like, and I feel the same way about my home. But like when I was at home, I didn't feel that sense of home. Like it felt like I didn't belong there. And so like it's funny to me that when people like you are seeking a sense of belonging or a sense of identity, because belonging is very strongly related to feeling identified and whole and complete. You look up to India, and I am looking up to like Canada to feel like, okay, I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna feel like I have the liberty to do whatever I want, and people not like giving a shit about it, So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I guess that's one of the, I guess that's, it's interesting. I think when I look at India, who knows if I ever moved there, like what that would actually feel like.
I know.
But whatever my imagination of that is, it seems to speak to, I think what we're talking about is an ontological orientation that in some sense we're born into and inherit a whole culture, right?
Exactly.
And that there's something about like, so it's often, I would have to say that, like, if you Heidegger, I think, would say that, like it or not, like, you are in a time that is nihilistic, right?
No.
There's what, no matter kind of what you consciously believe, you're, in some sense, you were born into a culmination of nihilism that's deeper, right, than any of our conscious beliefs are. And that's what he would say. But whether or not that's actually true, I think it's pointing to something that's a sign of our times that we're in, big time, right?
I know.
Yeah.
But like, I wonder if that nihilism or the doomeristic ideology that a lot of people are holding these days is sort of like only coming up because there is this lack of, community. Because I think like when you're talking about America, you're talking about maybe it being very individualistic, and it's in the architecture. It's like there's all these parts and they're supposed to symbolize something, which is home, for example,
Yeah.
but they're not home. It doesn't feel like home. There's this sort of like emptiness in terms of what the meaning is. And it goes back to our discussion on identity. It's like, who am I? Like, I don't want to say that I am empty or I'm a void and that it's just I'm just this body. I want to feel something like there is this soul in me, that I have some purpose, maybe this sense of becoming the greatest self I can be, and to achieve something that holds even the littlest of meaning. And it could be, for me, it's as simple as doing things with love for my friends, doing things with love in my work. And so as soon as I start feeling the sense of devotion, it becomes like a sense of worship for me, which is this Hindu way of seeing like everything is a worship. You are devoted in a way that you're going up to God,
Yeah. And it's not, and I get that sense that the devotion, that upward look, folds back and gives you a sense of identity.
Yes, exactly.
So if you remove that upward look, right?
Yeah.
And if you remove that, then by what means would you derive your identity? I think is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because I feel like with America, it seems like there's different ideals like for what we would like, but those ideals are always in conflict. And especially when it comes to our identity, there is conflict based on identity. It's like, I am white, you're black. There's a lot of like difficulty reconciling who we are and how we relate to each other. And that ends up to some degree contributing, at least I feel, towards this lack of agreement on what this up is like. Because if everybody believed in God, you could just say there's God, you're doing everything, up is God. But like, where would that up be when there's so much discourse on like, what are we idealizing, who are we idealizing, and what are our values? And I feel like society is divided so much because we don't really understand what we value at this point. In agreement.
Right, totally. Yeah. So when you tell me a little bit about this experience of being in India and growing up and not feeling like you belonged. How did that manifest for you?
Yeah, like, I mean, I feel like I felt a lot more comfortable in my identity being in a very individualistic culture, because India, there's just too many social norms for me to navigate. And being autistic, it was just like I would literally do things that were too terrible for me to be, and I felt like I couldn't breathe in my own home. Like every single thing I did was penalized, and there's a lot of social control, like, so people can shame you for not fitting in. And because I had like a very terrible way of judging society and like what the rules are and what's appropriate to behave, because like if you don't behave very appropriately, especially like all these like big aunties and uncles who are like apparently these judges, and I call them, like, in the Freudian sense, like the super ego, like the biggest super ego that can exist. There's multiple people that are just constantly there as judges, and they're also inside your head. That ends up like making your identity feel like it's not free to express itself. And as soon as I do that, there's just like penalty. So like for me, that was like the big issue with being in India. And so for me to seek freedom, I was like, I want to be in an individualistic culture. I want to come out where whatever I do, like I have my own way of doing it, and I don't have to like sort of conform. And this pressure to conform was like a lot in India. It's just, you need to like learn all the ways of doing things like
I
correctly,
can't, I can't imagine like I can't imagine that. So
I know.
just my initial sense of you, imagining you staying in a certain shape,
I know.
like it just hurts thinking about that.
I know. And it's like I couldn't, like I felt like I wasn't free to be myself. It's that to that degree, because I feel like there's a sense of ritualistic, which is also even on our religion. We all always like base ourselves upon rituals. And those rituals are like in our social norms on how to behave. And like you have to give gifts and you have to do it a certain way. And you have to like touch somebody's feet. And so
Yeah,
especially like in school with the authorities, that was like a problem, because like there's a certain need for respecting them. And how that respect plays out, like if I'm not looking into their eyes properly, they will judge it as like disrespect. And so like
yeah,
especially with like older aunties, that like respect dynamic, or like especially as a kid having to do that and not doing it properly, was like a big problem with me. And like me
yeah,
being free to like even just talk back, like I am a very argumentative person. And
yeah,
so like I can't argue with people. I'm like, I can't do that. That's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
it's completely suppressing my like sense of self in that way, being
Right.
in India, you know. Yeah.
Wow, wow. And what and how did your how did your closest, I'm curious, like your closest, the people that you were most intimate there in your family or your friends, how did they relate to your individuality and that
Not well.
energy?
I don't think I had a single friend until I came to Canada, but that was like majorly because like I was kept very sheltered. Like my parents were very, very like concerned for me. So like
Yeah,
uh I didn't like socialize very much. But the thing was like even at school, I just didn't get along with people. But the thing is, I found the internet. So like the internet was my outlet. It was that I met friends across India, even outside of India. So that's how I did the socializing. But at school, I didn't have a good time. It was that like it was again this social norms, like you, like I would say thank you to the people that were bullying me, because I didn't even know that they were bullying me. It's like it used to be that funny. And
wow,
uh just like this sense of complete, I'm like, I didn't understand a single thing. And so being in a culture that needs like that social understanding to a very, very high degree,
yeah,
like if you will bring shame to not just like your community but your family, and your family is the highest priority, right? If they are the people, then you're not acting properly, they will get all the like bad name that you're giving, and it goes to your entire family, not just your near family but your
oh
bigger
wow,
family. It's like,
wow. And all
yeah,
that
so
stuff is just built into the implicit
yeah,
etiquette of,
exactly.
wow, wow,
Exactly. And it felt suffocating in that regard, majorly because like
wow,
there's just a lot of, because of religion, I felt like Indian religion, now I love it, but
yeah,
before that I was just like, it felt like there were too many rules, like too many rules that were too strict, that felt like if I didn't behave properly, were going to like somehow penalize not just me but my family. And so
yeah,
uh, I felt like this extreme sense of rejection, not just from myself, but even from religion, like as a community, as a whole. And so now that I'm out and I'm like, maybe somebody, before that I was nobody, nobody believed in me, nobody gave a shit. But now that I have a sense of establishment, that entirety of shame and the sense of like social exclusion has transformed to like actually feeling like I have a sense of self. I have an identity. I don't feel like I'm sort of
huh,
like broken apart in that way, that like I
wow,
use that metaphor in like Secrets of Unity, that like the ego is your clothes. Like it's because shame is like the one tense when you don't feel like you have a sense of self. And so because I felt it, I recently came to this realization that your clothes are your sense of self-respect.
yeah,
They're something you wear to like not feel ashamed. And so
huh,
I've been sort of like working with fashion at least recently a lot to like sort of find myself and my identity a lot more and sort of like express it more in the world, and also like reconcile my feelings of shame that I
yeah,
like brought up throughout like growing up. And now I'm like, okay, I have friends, finally I belong, finally I know people that are interested in the same things as me. And so I think I also like watched your video with I don't remember who,
hmm?
the unified theory guy on
Yeah, yeah,
intelligence
right.
or something.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Greg.
And yeah, they were talking about something of how like you will only be recognized in a certain sphere. So like even if I was maybe intelligent or had talents, they wouldn't be recognized where people just don't have the eyes for that, you know.
Yeah.
They couldn't see it. So I can only show myself in a place where those things are recognized, right? And so I found this outlet coming all the way, doing like everybody thought I was stupid. Like I wasn't becoming doctor or an engineer, not doing competitive exams. Like that's the road everybody takes. So
Yeah.
I was just the most foolish person to take this risk. But I got the outcome and I came out and I'm now in Canada and I'm like, everybody appreciates the way I think. They want me to be this creative, all over the place, maybe ADHD like person, and
Yeah.
they don't mind that. So like for me, it was a sense of like belonging that I felt when I came here rather than at home, you know.
Wow,
Yeah.
that must be such a trip for you.
I know.
To have
It
the
was,
very thing that got would get you just in all kinds of trouble, right?
I know.
Be the very thing that that is enjoyed. You're met here with enjoyment, right? And
That
encouragement.
would get me trouble. Maybe. Yeah,
That
exactly.
must be a trip
I know.
being that way.
I
I just
know.
can't, it's funny.
Yeah.
I can just, it's so interesting. I'm just trying to imagine you being put into a shape. There's something about it that just looks like,
It
man,
doesn't make.
I don't think it'll work. In
I know.
the sense of like,
It
it just
didn't work for
hurts
years.
imagining it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also
Yeah.
didn't have the diagnosis though at that point. So like the
Yeah.
fact that all of those years there was no explanation for like why I was bringing shame not just to myself but my entire family. Like now it's like it makes sense. So there's no like nobody has the same amount of judgment that they had throughout the years. And like to me it's nice, but I still wish it was there sooner so that like I didn't face that backlash that I was facing from society. And so uh but I feel like when I'm here I don't feel it at that acute level. Like I still like sometimes do stupid things, and like my professor like recently told me I need to learn how to do impression management because I just don't know how to like, because I'm so authentic in that way, like to an extreme degree that I just can't learn how to like, you know,
Yeah.
mold myself to fit into somebody's like perception of me. So
Yeah.
like it's still here, even in Canada, but it isn't felt to the degree that I feel like I'm rejected somehow by society, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, got it. It's a little subtler here. There's a
Yeah, it's
sense of like here where you have to, because it's interesting because I've always had this sense, and I've worked with people in, I've noticed this in um Asians who grew up in Asia, Indians, and people from the Middle East. When I've coached, I've like worked with them personally and gotten to know them, and we start to get into kind of the deeper levels of stuff that comes up for them. It's so interesting because it's their experience. It's interesting. Their experience of shame is so intense.
Yeah.
But what's striking to me is how explicit it is. There's something about like it was so clear. I mean, in different versions based on the country, but this explicitly being shamed and being aware that
Yes.
you are an awful, like a failure or a being, was so kind of clearly the case for them.
Yeah, because they couldn't tell you to your face that that's who
Absolutely.
you are, that's how you're being seen. And
Yeah.
my dad, like as a kid, like he used to say that you don't live in isolation. And I'm like, that's why I wanted to be in an individualistic culture, because I didn't want to bring shame to my family. I
Yeah.
would rather be in isolation and people just leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
being in India was like, I don't live in isolation. I know that every single thing I do, every step I take, it's gonna be a mistake and it's gonna just be a problem for every single person that's around me. So, you know.
Yeah, it's not like you're trying, it wasn't like it's coming from a place of you wanting to be rebellious. I can feel
Exactly.
you being in consideration of your family, right?
Yeah.
It's just this current running through you, right?
Yeah, it's just who I am. And so, but the thing is, I'm unaware of a lot of times sort of not doing things correctly in terms of being respectful enough, or, you know, following the norms properly,
Yeah.
that now I'm just like, those things are appreciated here. People love that I'm authentic and direct and honest to the degree that I am. But like the people that don't appreciate it like will not embrace that side of you, or like even see that it has anything to offer. But like, I mean, of course my parents love, like everybody would come to me for advice on fashion. Like they're like, if you look ugly, I'm like, yes, you look bad, like I'm not gonna tell you, I'm not gonna mess around. So those things were like, some people really like, they knew that I'm the person to come to because of that nature, but they also knew my problem, so they'd be like, just keep your mouth shut. Like in some places, just shut
Right.
up.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's interesting because in contrast, in some, and I don't know which one's better or worse. I mean, but for Westerners, right? Like people from the United States and stuff like that are born in Europe and all that. Like it's their sense of shame is so it's implicit.
Yeah.
It's like not, it's like mostly it's somewhat in one way, like it's not like either you be a doctor or you will be a decrepit human being, right? Like it's more like
I know.
more like it's in the unsaid, and like who would talk to you and not talk to you, and these kind of weird mixed messages, right? That the shame, and in some sense I'm not sure which one I would choose, right? But in some sense the thing I appreciated about the other one was is it being so explicit makes it a little simpler, right?
Yeah.
In terms of,
but like the thing is that,
yeah,
I mean, I can see it being simpler, but the problem is that like it's not just me reading into it. It's the fact that like
yeah,
it's explicit to a degree that everybody knows your name. Like it's like your name has a certain particular association to it. And I feel maybe in like, people don't talk about other people that much in the West. It's like, nope, somebody like made this face to me, and you'll feel a sense of maybe implicit shame that people are seeing me like this, but it wouldn't be so explicit to the degree that, you know, this is how you're recognized in society. And that sense of recognition of your identity being like to some degree tainted ends up like sort of like making you very aware of that's who you're being seen as, you know.
so that I would say is the difference right there. Or one of the differences is, it sounds like in where you're from, that identity is in some sense outsourced in the system, right? And like in some, like, and a lot of it's really explicit, but it's in the system. I don't have that sense, right? Like I don't have a clear sense of like, you do this or this and this and you're a good person or a bad person, and it's all of it's implicit, right? And it's a lot subtler, at least in my observation. But I think that comes with its own
problems.
I think what you're talking, it comes with its own difficulties, right? Its own complications, right? In a certain sense. Because I think
if you don't know that you are being judged, then you're like, I'm even unaware of my own name in public. That would be difficult.
Yeah. It's really, it's interesting. I think the way that it comes across is within, it's the suit. I think it's the superegos in people's psychologies where it lives, is that fucking tyrant that just
I know.
reading minds and like letting you know that you're a failure and you don't. It's like an internalized, implicit sense of a voice that I think is psychologized, and it sounds like that superego is in your culture is externalized in the explicit, right? Wow.
And you guys have it just within yourself. Like you will be judging yourself, or like maybe self-consciousness is the word I would say that you Americans have. You're self-conscious about your perception, but it's like, it's just all in your head. You won't know in public that that's how you're being seen. Nobody's going to tell you. But like, I didn't have to be self-conscious. I'm actually never self-conscious. I have no idea how people are seeing me. And so like the fact that it was very clear to know that that's how you're being recognized, and everybody telling you specifically not to do those things because you're embarrassing not just yourself but everybody around you. So that sense of embarrassment I think I've carried throughout. And like the first time I felt like I did something or achieved something in my life, it gave me this sense of respect. And like the first time somebody said, I respect you, it just felt like just different to me, and like extremely something that I focused on. And like, why am I feeling this way? Feeling this sense of like honor or esteem for the very first time in my life. It gave me, I don't know. And so, but now that I'm here, I feel like I'm this overconfident person. I'm like, I have the entirety of confidence in myself and in my capabilities.
Yeah.
Now that I don't have to worry about other people's like feelings, I'm like, I'm going to do what I want and I'm going to do it. And I
Totally.
don't constantly worry about it, and then don't feel this sense of, I don't care if you don't respect me. I feel assured of myself. But like the first time I felt that sense of respect, it was just shocking to me. Like I am being honored, and it's difficult for me to understand given my history, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the source of that sense of your self-respect and that that sense of confidence of like, you're gonna just, where does that come from?
I think I've always had it, which was a part of the problem. Like that's the thing that got me to shame, like because I didn't give a shit. And so not caring about those things were the problem initially. But now I'm like in a culture where it's embraced to take risks, to just like me approaching you via an email. That's something that people appreciate. It's not abnormal to do something like that. So I just started doing all of these things, and I feel like I sort of vibe with your culture a lot more in that regard, because like differences are validated. You're like allowed to express your individuality in every way you want. You don't have to like, you know, just become this product of a culture and you're expected to sort of like live with it, you know?
Right. Totally. What did that professor tell you? Like you should work on what?
Impression management.
Impression management. Yeah. See that's really interesting, because I think one of the things that's really there for a lot of people is this constant sense or recognition. So when I'm relating to you, right? On one level, I'm relating to you, but I'm also relating to and monitoring or have a sense of what I think you are thinking about me.
Exactly.
And if I don't have that, right? It's on one level, it's a way of being attuned, right, to you, right? Is I have a sense of what you think about me in some kind of way. But there's I think in America, probably, I mean, I definitely see this over and over in circle. People are just stifled by that, right? Where all they're relating to is what you think about them. And in fact, who they are, right, is derived completely from that on some level, right? And that's big time. And that's big time in America, right?
Oh, and also like that relates to your sense of like implicit superego, like you said. I feel like that I notice even with people that they're very self-conscious here. That maybe you aren't being explicitly shamed, but you're constantly trying to like understand how you're being perceived by another person, and to like sort of, you know, change yourself based on that perception. And so like, even for example, if I'm flirting with someone, I'm like, it takes me a long time to understand like how when the limit is, and like when it's like when I need to sort of modulate myself to fit into like what would get me my way. I'm just like, this is what I want, this is where I'm going. And so it works out with work, and I'm like, I know what I want, so I'm gonna do what I want, and it yields me the results. And so far I'm not complying to the university's demands, in the sense like I'm not doing all the university stuff, I'm doing my own stuff outside of university. Even within the university, I'm like, give me my own space, I'll do what I want. So it works out in America, but I feel like there is always this sense of like, sometimes it playing in my favor, sometimes it not, because I don't know how I'm being seen, and then that ends up being like a problem. But the thing is, like, I've learned it throughout, like through time, I've learned how to mentalize and to sort of like have that sort of, you know, perception and this looking glass self kind of thing. But the thing with me is that like, if I have a hunch of something, I'll just like ask you, is that how you're seeing me? And then should I change myself? And to me, like, the fact that I can even explicitly state here is somewhat liberating, because people are going to appreciate when I ask you, like, is this something I should do? Would that make you comfortable? People in America like it. But in India, I don't think like I can be as like direct about. I need to know the rules already, like pre-coded. I can't ask you what the rules are, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, got you. Yeah, I totally got you.
Mhm.
Interesting. And so there's and so it sounds like that there's, it's interesting, but like when I think about the restricted part, right, for you in India, right, and the all the heavy and historical social norms that are so explicit, right? I know
Yeah.
that there's class systems too,
Yeah.
like are
Yeah.
probably have their own social norms within those social norms, and
Yeah.
there's a whole thing kind of decked out that. And what do you have a sense of what is that doing? All of that normativity, right?
For myself or for them?
For like in the sense of what is all that normativity for the sake of in India? And does that
Social cohesion. Like I feel like it creates this sense of collectivism, but it's like a fake sense of collectivism. Like I told you, the super ego thing, like it's not really collectivistic. It's just like using norms as a tool of creating unity that comes like everybody knows what the rules are, and so everybody plays by the rules, and so you can connect with anybody based on those rules, right? And it's
yeah,
also religiously related, like everybody knows certain ways of doing things, and so if you follow them you can relate easily with that community, and usually religion serves that purpose. Even in America, it's like
yeah,
you want to belong, so you want a community that has a certain set of rules, and so you talk to them about those things and you just fit in. And so I feel like social norms throughout society have been like placed like for creating a sense of clarity. I mean it's not like the rules are clear, but it creates a sense of like order within society, and that order creates a sense of like connection and collectivism that keeps everything in place. And so me, the one that's breaching the order, ends
mhm,
up like in India collapsing everything, and that collapse is not positively regarded. But in America, it's like we want innovation. We want people to break the norms, to go beyond, go outside the box or whatever.
yeah,
But like in India, the perception is a lot different. You don't want to be the one that's breaking something. You have to be the one that's,
right,
blended in very easy, you know.
right,
Yeah.
totally, totally. That makes a whole lot of sense. And I'm just kind of thinking about just the sense of, I mean, the way Tillich really goes, um, the theologian. He's kind of he's a continental philosopher, existential theologian, and he
Don't know too
talks
much.
a lot about idolatry, right?
Oh,
As being and I'm wondering if that's part of a little bit of what goes on the inauthentic spectrum in India with all the norms where I mean, just from what you're talking about, it's like if I was Tillich, it seemed like it's in the rigidity, right,
yes.
of
The
those
rigid.
things, right?
Yes.
Is a kind of idolatry, right? Which is
Mhm.
which is always the shadow of a kind of theism in some sense, right?
I never saw it that way. That's very interesting because like it seems like you're suggesting that the social norms are very identified and placed in the structure, like placing God in like an image
Yeah,
that they like to some degree define our culture. But like I also wonder to what degree it relates to, because like with God, like we have different ways of working with that image. Like we can like there's avatars, for example, like there's one God, and that can shape shift into a woman to become like,
yeah,
have a different form and like do different things for different reasons. And so that seems like even in the collective imagination a lot more flexible
yeah,
than the norms that are there.
yeah,
Like the norms seem to be a lot more rigid in that form that
yeah,
uh, there is little room for exploration, which is what I felt. Like there is little room to question or explore and to see like how society could improve, because it's sort of like made itself so rigid, because like it seems to dictate that there are certain correct ways of being and that you have to follow those in
yeah,
order to be considered a good person,
yeah,
or at least a person who doesn't bring shame, in that sense.
yeah, totally. Because it's also the case of, and I want to ask you about this. So there's in the in the Christian tradition, there is a sense of divinity, definitely, right? However, when I look at the theism, right, of Christianity, and I look at Hinduism, there's something really different about the two.
Yeah.
Like,
definitely.
And I'm wondering about what is that difference? Like, because the divine, like the divine in the way that you're talking about, right? That such that it's the divine that what I'm hearing you say is really the thing that grants your identity and like who you are on some level. But and there's a way where and what I heard you say is in India, it's all about like the God in me meets the God in you, and there's like kind of this reverence of this sense of the divine kind of going everywhere.
Yeah, and separated.
Yeah.
I think that's one big thing. It's like, I mean, I think I like that a lot more because it seems to sort of have a division of essences. Like, for example, Lord Shiva, there's different associations. Like, you can associate a certain color with them, you can associate a certain fruit with it, a certain, like, like bhang or like a drink with it or whatever else, and those things, or a dance with it. And so those things sort of define a very particular flavor of divine. And then there's another god which has a particular flavor of the divine, which has maybe the sun flavor, which has like this quality of being like the sun being bright or whatever else. And so we have astrology and those elements as well ingrained deeply in our culture. And so what I feel is that, like, I personally appreciate that a lot more because it's my general brain, it works constantly on dissecting things. I always want to separate things, even if there's a coherent whole and there's this one thing this conjoins. I want to see where, like, there's a difference. Like, even with my personality, there's facets. I have a sense of identity with maybe my work, I'll keep that separate. I have a sense of identity with maybe passion that I'm discovering, I'll keep that separate. And so I'm constantly trying to divide my own identity into subsets that can help me to some degree, capture it more cohesively, but without limiting itself. Because I feel like sometimes even claiming the divine to be divine and just saying that it's what it is, it's somewhat reductive. It's not taking into account its expansiveness. And so us Hindus, the fact that we're dividing it, it's like taking into account all of these different factors. What are the flavors that are available in the divine? And we're able to actually taste them. And that's the same with my identity. I'm trying to see what all do I have to offer. I'm not just this one individual person who's this coherent whole, but this coherent whole has like multiple facets, and I want to all like express them in various ways: art, music, whatever else,
that multiplicity.
Yes, exactly.
Right? And you said it's kind of, in a certain sense, I got the sense of like, yeah, there may be one divine, but it expresses itself in all these different ways, right? And gathers itself and distinguishes itself, that you can taste different aspects of it. And all of that kind of somehow like, because the Western mind looks at that and they're like, how the hell, they see all these contradictions, right?
Yeah.
They're like, that's what I mean by, I have a feeling, whatever it is I feel back into that then lets me know I'm me, is very different than somebody who's from India, let's say, right? Or Hindu. And I think it has something to do with that. This kind of I think that makes the Western, like, goes like, they look at all the gods and all that articulation, they just start getting dizzy. It's just so full, right? But there's the sense of, like, so for you, so do you have like a meditation practice? Like, tell me a little bit about,
I'm one person who not practice anything. Like, I am the person who just, like, I feel like even when I'm talking to you, it just sort of happens. Like, I don't have to have a certain, practice for it, but I for certain have a contemplative like routine. Like, it's like, for me, meditation falls into this thing that I always do, which is think. And when I'm thinking, I am sort of tapping into my intuition, which we spoke about in mindfulness before, that, like, even if I'm doing my work, I know I need to focus, but I always understand that I have a tendency towards being a lot more intuitive, or like wanting to tap into the realms that are higher or whatever else. So I don't want to just meditate and sit and maybe have a certain practice. It's constantly trying to maybe induce an altered state of consciousness within myself
Yeah.
through just being. I don't have to take drugs. I just have to be, and I can to some degree tap into those levels.
Yes.
And I can do them for different reasons. I can do them for writing an essay. I can do them for, I don't know, maybe even understanding my identity, maybe writing a song. For me, they're always expressive in that way, that I want some content in it. And when I'm using art, that's my major tool to work with.
Yeah.
And anything imaginative that helps me sort of structure my identity and also connect to something bigger than myself,
Yeah.
in a way that feels meditative, in a way that I'm dissolved in it completely in the act of it. But I don't have to separate. Like I'm sitting and I'm meditating and I'm sitting and there's but it's always the sense of maybe dancing, but dancing so fully that I'm in the flow of it all, and that
Yes.
I'm reaching the divine somehow through it, you know?
Yes. Yes. Totally. Totally. That makes a whole lot of sense. That makes a whole lot of sense. That's really great. That's really, really, really great.
Do you practice, like, how do you feel like your relationship to meditation? Because like I've always found sitting still difficult. So like the reason I'm interested in art is because it makes me do something. I can write a song, I can write poetry, I can dance. So it's always this element of expressiveness that comes into it, and it's a part of my identity. I know that I'm a very expressive, out loud person. But some people that are maybe quieter, they like a different type of practice. They would like just sit in a place, calm down, peace up. Like somebody tells me to relax, I'm like, bro, just like I can't do anything relaxation related.
Yeah,
Let
totally.
me just be, you know.
Totally.
Yeah.
I could definitely, I mean, I think this is more the case as I've gotten older, but like, I mean, meditation for me has been, but it's funny, there, it's meditation in some sense is super neato for me, because it feels like I don't relate to the sense of like I'm meditating, right? So as to just to be present, and because this is really good for me and I'm going to cultivate concentration, those kinds of things. If that's what it was really about, I wouldn't do it. Like it's
I know.
it's actually it's very close to I think my experience of what had me get into philosophy and starting to read philosophy. It's more has to do with the imaginative and perception, I think, is what I probably get the most out of, because it's more like meditation is a way where awareness takes on a wondrous quality and unfolds, right? And in some sense, the austere part of it has to do with the wonderment happening in the most, what is most near, right? Like Heidegger talks a lot about that where it's like the thing that's paradoxically the furthest away from us is the thing that's concealed in its obviousness, right?
Yeah.
So in some sense, I think for me, meditation is this kind of turn into being aware of like what's concealed right now that I'm not seeing, yet it's present and it's not present. And it's like that, it's more like it feels like a spaceship ride into the ontological ground. And so
I find it so fascinating because like for us, like when I said Hindu meditation is like intuitive in that regard, what I was saying is that we have this concept of the third eye, right? And when you say seeing, the first thing that comes to me is like you're trying to see the unconcealed, which sounds very similar to like sort of trying to open like the sense of having some perception of something that's unseen, something that you can't see just with this perception, but like using the faculty of imagination, using this sense of wonderment that can tap into, again, this intuitive quality of being. But like I'm always wondering how you feel about it being embodied in your physical body, because that seems like you're interested in metaphysical aspects, but where born in this, and the most closest we are is to our physical
Oh
sense
yeah.
of being.
Yeah.
And how do you feel that with your meditation? Do you feel like you
Oh
connect
yeah.
to it a
It's like,
little more?
it's like very embodied. In fact, I'd say that that's that's the thing that lights up the most, right? Is the body,
Yeah.
right?
Body.
Yeah, for me, it's like, well, my first experience of meditation was at a 10-day Vipassana, um, which is essentially body scanning, right? Part by part, and going through and feeling like over like 11 hours a day sitting in silence, right? Um, so I think that just really dove me in the deep dive of being somatically grounded, right? As the object of meditation being the body, right? In that sense. I'm also just really physical. I think I'm just really kinesthetic by nature. I mean, I was a trainer for since I was like 16 until I was like 30. I was like a massage, like a rolfer massager person for,
Mhm.
years and years. So I just have a kinesthetic orientation. I'm just really physical. So
Yeah.
I think I'm in my body in a way that like, that I don't even have to think about it in that sense.
Does that give you a sense of personhood? Because we've been talking about identity, and I feel like a lot of times our body seems to be the closest relational aspect of our identity. It's how we're recognized. I see you, the first thing I see you is your physical form.
Yeah.
But then there's also sometimes this aspect of like having an identity beyond your body. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like
Yeah.
uh when I feel the sense of spiritual connection to maybe this aspect of the soul,
Yeah.
I see it being embodied in this body, but there's some quality to it that is detached from physicality. It becomes metaphysical in a way that it feels like I can imagine myself to be somebody in my past life that I cannot imagine. Like, I mean, it's a fake. That's the thing with intuition and imagination. It's
Yeah.
sort of like a part of illusions, which also has some element of truth to it.
Yeah.
So if I'm using maybe say art or something that's like I can feel like I'm a bird, but like
Yeah.
am I a bird? I'm physically not a bird. But
Yeah.
I can relate so much to that metaphor that it gives me a sense of identity beyond who I am in this physical form. And
Yeah.
so like this duality is so extremely emphasized, and like I constantly feel like I'm feeling like this body is mine, like,
Mhm.
but this is not me. But the sense of being in what is mine
Yeah.
is very important, because the sense of home, like we talked about before, we need a sense of belonging and a sense of like being grounded and embodied. It relates to even belonging with friends and other people, that it gives you this like solidification of identity.
Yeah.
Otherwise your identity is like somewhere else, you can't capture it, and
Yeah.
so
Totally. Well, it's kind of like you could talk about on one level, you could talk about there's the body as the body I think about, right? And can become present to. But then
Mhm.
there's like the lived body, which has really been a point of like for me has been a big part of meditation has been this kind of sense in which on some way my body is oriented to the world by precisely disappearing, right? In
Mhm.
becoming in a because your body is a lived body, it's mostly a room making for the world. And
Yeah.
when it works, you actually don't see it as an object. It's usually like it hurts, or then all of a sudden it becomes kind of an object. So
Yep.
there's this kind of way, and I think there's some. So I could tell you about this experience. So I just got done. This is interesting. I think this has something to do with this, and I think what you're talking about in terms of imagining yourself as a bird, in the way that you're talking about imagination, and this that gives you a sense of identity that goes beyond
Nonsense.
a
Yeah.
duality, a transcendence to it. It sounds like there's a way that I'm imagining has something to do with what Corbin calls the imaginal, right? Where
Mhm.
it's a way of using imagination that actually enhances perception, right?
Yeah.
Where it makes more of the world or an aspect of the world disclose, right?
Yeah. You
It's what
said,
kids do when they pretend and do kinds
yeah.
of things. They make a fort, and that's the spaceship over there, they can live the world out. Like,
I know.
yeah, it's not, it's, and I'm imagining that's like a lot of that orientation in it, a lot of what you talked about
Mm.
with
I
India.
think
It's like
you
it has
did
lots
too.
of the imaginal going on in it. Yeah.
Yeah, because you spoke of a sense of wonderment, which is again this childlike
Yeah.
sense of
Yeah.
being wondrous and curious, and that sense of awe, like that feeling of awe, is often connected to transcendence. And I feel like when you spoke of seeing beyond your reality, or like focusing on perception a lot within your meditative practices, it seems to like emphasize this sense of going back into your inner child, becoming free
Yeah.
to explore your identity
Yeah.
beyond its physical form.
Yeah.
Like I can dream that I'm a pilot, I don't have to be a pilot, but you have so much freedom in that realm of
Totally.
dreaming whatever you want, you know?
Oh,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah. I mean, I just had a, I mean, I survived my childhood too by existing in a whole fantasy world, right?
No.
That like
Yeah.
that I got me in trouble all the time because I could literally just go into this whole world. So my imagination is just pretty developed.
Mhm.
In fact, I think it's funny because I talk to a lot of people that like would, I think they would imagine I'm like intellectual. I don't feel that it's about intellect as much as it's about imagination for me, right? I
Interesting.
think, yeah, all of
Can I
these
so I
conversations, all of this is like, to me, this is more about imagination, right? In that sense, seeing
I feel
things
the
in such a
same.
way, right? That it, you can, you can see that you didn't see how much was there. And it's like this inexhaustibleness that becomes present that you can kind of
Yeah.
see through, seeing from a different angle, and that sense of wonderment that that evokes, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I find that very fascinating because, like, I forget who this philosopher is, but in my Jewish philosophy class, this guy from like some different religion wants to convert to Judaism. And so he goes to like a rabbi who, like, sort of in his conversations, tells him that like God is not talking to you, because this guy comes to him with a dream, and he's like, God told me that my actions are like, my intention is perfect, but how I'm acting is like not perfect. And so that like makes him question his entire religious belief. It's like, what is my religion teaching me? God is telling me that I'm doing all these rituals, and those rituals are not good practices. Like some religions actually sanction, jihad. They sanction a lot of stuff. So like he's like, God is telling me now that I'm doing the wrong thing, even though I want to do the right thing. So he goes to this rabbi, and this rabbi is like, God doesn't talk to you. God doesn't talk to anybody. God is something that exists beyond our reality. And so he's very confused about like how exactly to conceptualize his vision. Like he would say he had an intuitive vision in that regard, right?
Yeah.
And so eventually what this rabbi discusses is this concept of the not active imagination, active intellect. And so this concept of the active intellect seems to talk about this faculty of intuition in a way that it's focusing on intellect, but it's also focusing on vision. It's focusing on how, like, there is this like thing that we tap into, maybe transcendence or whatever else, and that active intellect is what is connected to God. And the fact that you're having these visions, like with Moses, or whatever visions he had, were these like connections to this active intellect. And now you're talking the same way, like we're talking, and it's the sense of people claiming you to be intellectual, but you feel it to be intuitive and imaginative.
Yeah.
But whenever we're getting into a flow, I feel we're tapping into the same faculty of going towards something that helps us connect to this sense of being that's beyond our physical reality, a
Yeah.
being that is connected to God in some way. And we can go to that place and we can grab concepts from there, we can grab ideas, or we can come to the truth, or whatever else you want to call it. But it's still somewhere else in that regard.
Totally.
It's not here. Yeah.
Yes, this verticality, right? This
Yeah.
verticality that that yeah, that you can bring, like, that affords you to be able to relate a horizontal way,
Mhm.
in some sense, that you can see that verticality in someone else and call that out and can start to tap into it. So it's like that sense of something else is disclosing, right?
It's
That's
yeah.
beyond us, right? That's
Yeah.
inexhaustible in that sense, right?
Hmm.
Yet,
But like, but we cannot communicate if we don't have this physical though. Like that's the funny part, because though there's this aspect of verticality or like verticality and us reaching something up, like we were talking about God being up, right? And so
Yeah.
if I want to see God in you, I have to go up, like in terms of like looking at you somehow towards a higher sense of being. But sometimes when we're talking about embodiment, it goes a lot down. It goes very much to the roots, even deeper to the earth, and we can feel nature at its fullest. And so it's like this duality somehow like sort of works with itself and cannot work without one or another. I cannot see your higher self without you being present here physically. It's just
Yeah.
impossible. And so,
Totally.
you know,
I know
yeah.
that, like, I know that the the way that Christopher talks a lot about this is about this kind of way that this, he calls it the suchness and the moreness,
Oh,
right, come together. These moments where it's just like that. Your particular like concrete manifestation in its utter suchness, right? At the same time, is animated by and speaks to what is inexhaustible in you, right? In this way that is more real than anything else, right? So
yeah.
yeah, and it just does seem like, you know, the work of, if you have, if you have you checked out Marcel Ponte yet? Marcel
No.
Ponte, you may really want to check him out. I'd be really interested because he's really about
Oh, I know who you're
philosophy of
talking
the
about,
body.
phenomenology guy.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know. I think that does. I've only read of. I've never heard anybody pronounce his name, so I was like, "Who you're talking?" Wait, I know.
yeah.
I
It's
know what you're
French.
saying. Yeah.
Marcel Ponte. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Yeah, but this kind of, because he would say that it's interesting. He would say that the body is a transcendence, right? That it's always already beyond itself, right? Ahead of itself, like behind itself, right? And even this way of this kind of this ambiguity of the body, right? This fundamental ambiguity of the body and the tension that it's constantly, I think about it, it's kind of like the body feels to me like the nervous system feels to me. This is, I get this a lot when I'm meditating. I just kind of feel like it's like on some level, it's this site that gathers the world in this constraint, and it sees itself, right? And its way of seeing itself is somehow like, if you, because we could easily ask ourselves, is like, why did the Big Bang, right, grow a nervous system, right? On some
Yeah.
level, it's those are the kinds of thoughts where I'll play with in I'll imagine, like when I'm meditating, right, where I'll be just like, you know, on some level, all that is came together in a nervous system and like thinned itself out enough to itself to, this is the first time, at least as far as we can understand in the cosmos, human beings are the first occasion where like being thinned out to itself to where it can have some semblance of its own beingness, right?
Self-awareness. But the
Yeah.
funny thing is that like I cannot imagine it being another way. And like, especially when I rely and fall back to Hindu philosophy, there is this element of self-awareness that's highlighted to a very strong degree, self-realization. And so Buddhism is like there's no self, so what are you going to realize? But like we have the strong sense of knowing something within ourselves, you can call it a soul,
Yeah.
and to reach enlightenment you have to come to a recognition of it. And so this sense of like human beings being the first people that can do that, to me is just baffling, because it seems to be the very fundamental of anything transcendent or anything spiritual. Like you need a sense of
Yeah.
awareness
Yeah.
to like, so you know, perceive something.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, then you're just like you're not exactly conscious in that regard, with fallbacks to mindfulness. Like you need a sense of awareness and expansion of that awareness. And
Right.
like imagine that not being a faculty in human beings. Like if we were an animal not having that, it's like how would we reach God? Like would we ever even come to the concept of God? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I mean, this is like, it's interesting. Awareness is something it's hard to really say even what awareness is, but it's like the most self-evident thing that we could ever encounter. But it's such a mystery when you really like go to look at it. One of the things I do in circling a lot is we do these kind of inquiry statements where we'll just be in a group and we'll just say awareness is, and then another person will say awareness is, and you go around, right, and you just in the whole thing is about encountering. You say what awareness is as your actual direct encounter with awareness, right? And so you can imagine, like, as it goes around, and every time you say that, there's a kind of deepening or a presence, but also just a befuddlement and an amazement of that there isn't even awareness at all, right?
I know.
That is a mystery that's so strangely ordinary because we are always aware. But here's the
But
thing about it,
sometimes
is we
we're not.
find ourselves aware, right?
Yeah. Like for example, we would say the faculty of intuition sort of like falls into this realm of awareness and non-awareness, because it is trying to integrate this sense of unconscious realization. And I feel like when I fall back into patterns that have helped me understand myself, I wasn't consciously thinking of identifying myself with something. Maybe see the symbol of the bird. I didn't think of like, this is something I'm going to take and I'm going to be like, this is a part of my identity. It wasn't something I was aware of,
Yeah.
but it was in a flow to a degree that the awareness was sort of like a part of it, but only made sense afterwards. Like during the process, it's like
Yes.
I just felt connected to it and I didn't know it in its fullest form. And then the awareness became more and more and more extreme. And then I could hold on to it. And I think that's the process of like awareness being some kind of grasp onto something. And you need to be able to hold on to it
Right.
to actually perceive it to the fullest. But
Yeah.
more often than not, we're sort of like perceiving without full awareness. Like it's like unconscious and incidental things that happen to us, and we don't even recognize how much of it is a part of who we are.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot that is not conscious to
Yeah.
us, and
Yeah.
but then we have to come to this awareness. We have to sort of be self-aware, and only then can we become ourselves. But who we are is not accessible in that way, you know? Like
Right.
our soul is not accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I have to get going.
Oh,
Unfortunately, I have I think a client coming right in a few moments. It was great talking with you.
you too. You too.
Yeah,
Yes.
this
We
is
spoke
awesome.
for a long time. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
This was the first time meeting you. I think like most people that you talk to, like they're like ongoing. And so like it was pretty
Yeah.
nice. And I've never spoken to you before. Like even on the phone, it was just email. So it was very nice to have
Oh, I
you.
really appreciate you reaching out, and I'm glad we were able to do it. I appreciate your energy, and it was really cool that some of the things that we talked about with this difference in culture and the way that you're talking about identity. I just really appreciated, like, I have a feeling that's going to be kind of sinking in. I'll be thinking about a lot of that, reflecting on that for a while. And congratulations on coming to the West and like feeling this kind of expansion. And
I know.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy for you. You do
Thank you.
you feel on fire. In a
Yes,
good
I
way,
feel on fire. Yeah, I do.
in a
For
really good
certain.
way. In a really good way.
And
And I'm glad you're
I'm happy
experiencing
you.
people embracing you and appreciating that. Big time.
And I feel like you are part of the fire, and thanks for lighting it up. You're
Right
okay.
on. Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.